For 4 years, Russia has thrown everything it has at Ukraine on the ground, and for 4 years, the map has barely moved. So, a frustrated President Vladimir Putin changed how the war is being waged, taking it into the sky. Wave after wave of Shahed drones and cruise missiles now slam into Ukrainian cities every single night, because the men and tanks failed, and the drones are cheaper. It's a true air war of attrition, designed to exhaust Ukraine's interceptors and munitions, trying to break the country's will one power station and one apartment block at a time. But in the middle of that storm, a little British weapon that most people had quietly forgotten about is suddenly back in the headlines. Ukrainian crews have nicknamed it the murder pencil. It doesn't chase heat like most other shoulder-fired munitions, it can't be tricked by flares or jammed by electronic warfare. Its official name is Starstreak, and against the cheap mass-produced threats now filling Ukraine's skies, Russia has yet to find a reliable answer to it. Notably, Starstreak isn't a novel invention, appearing in news reports almost as soon as the war started, but it's re-emerged 4 years later, and the reason why will explain how the entire war has changed. Now let's start with what Starstreak actually is, because the answer is not as simple as a faster missile or less reaction time. Everybody already knows speed matters in air defense. A faster missile gives the target less time to respond, and Starstreak is fast, at between Mach 3 and Mach 4, depending on circumstances and the specific launcher. But speed alone is only a part of the reason. What truly sets the missile apart from every other very short-range air defense system is its guidance method, and this is where Starstreak becomes frightening. You see, most of the time, missiles will lock onto a target via heat-seeking, finding the hottest available object in the sky. This is important because early heat-seeking models will make the sun their target and fly off. This has the advantage of being straightforward to design and use, while also being fire and forget, where once you launch the missile, you can't really tell it where to go next. That's because the missile itself has a seeker head that locks onto a target's heat signature before launch. Once the operator gets an audio tone confirming the lock, fires, and the missile then chases the heat source on its own all the way to impact. The operator can move the instant the missile leaves the tube, which is enormously useful. It keeps operators alive. The method itself is fast, and no one needs to keep tracking the target after launch. But if a missile is chasing heat, you can give it something hotter to chase. And that something can be flares, which modern aircraft carry as standard equipment. Add modern infrared countermeasures and a hard evasive turn at the right moment, and that guaranteed kill turns into a coin flip. Starstreak was built to ignore all that. Instead, the entire launcher uses laser beam riding guidance. After deploying the pencils, the operator keeps the target in sight, and the aiming unit projects a guidance beam, essentially a laser grid, that the missile simply follows. The missile then follows a path defined by where the operator is pointing. The big advantage here is that the operator is doing the aiming. Once they point a laser, they can slightly turn it to keep up with the target, and the missile will follow, simply because it's designed to do precisely that. The target can dump every countermeasure in its inventory, and Starstreak won't even flinch. The manufacturer, Thales, describes the guidance as immune to all known infrared and radio frequency countermeasures, and that claim sits at the very center why this weapon matters. So let's walk through what actually happens from the moment the trigger is pulled, because this is where the design gets clever. The operator tracks the target through the aiming unit. When the trigger goes, a first-stage motor fires inside the launch tube, but it deliberately burns out before the deployment module has fully left the tube. That's intentional, and it protects the operator from the rocket's backblast. Once it's clear at a safe distance, the second stage motor ignites and accelerates a missile to a velocity greater than Mach 3, and by some accounts closer to Mach 4, in a fraction of a second. Then the second stage burns out and releases its payload, which is the part that earns the nickname. We keep talking about a missile, but it's important to understand why the system actually has a separate deployment unit. Instead of one warhead, Starstreak releases 3 smaller warheads simultaneously. Each is a laser-guided tungsten dart, a little over 390mm or 15.6 inches long, housed in a missile that's approximately 1.39 meters, and contains the actual explosive material covering the last foot, fitted with a delayed action impact fuse. That fuse is designed so the dart punches through the target's armor first, detonating inside structures or past the reinforced coating on tanks. Each dart also carries a small explosive charge to expel shrapnel all around when the missile actually hits. And since there are 3 of them being launched simultaneously, the chances of a direct hit get exponentially higher, and the actual damage dealt can be enough to down an aircraft. 3 guided tungsten darts moving at over Mach 3 can absolutely annihilate a helicopter's rotor assembly or fuel system. Helicopters, and to a lesser extent airplanes, are exactly the kind of target Starstreak was actually designed to kill, and that's how it was initially used. At the beginning of April 2022, just days after the system was mentioned to be imported into Ukraine, the military shared footage of a Russian Mi-28 attack helicopter being struck over the Luhansk region, its tail boom sheared clean off as it skimmed the treetops. A UK Ministry of Defence source told The Times that the video was most likely the Starstreak in action, and that it was the first time the missile had been used to bring down a Russian aircraft. The helicopter's crew reportedly survived. Notably, although the kill was widely attributed to Starstreak by the British MOD and by defence analysts who studied the footage, this was an attribution based on the visible signature of the strike, not an official Russian confirmation. Either way, before that morning, Starstreak was a respected but obscure British system most people outside NATO had never heard of. After it, a lot of people got interested very quickly. Now, Starstreak comes in more than one form, and the platform matters as much as the missile. In its simplest form, it is shoulder-launched. That's perfect for a single trained operator to assemble it and be ready to fire in a matter of seconds, engage a threat from almost any position, and relocate immediately afterward, giving it the most flexibility. But it's also limited in the way any shoulder-fired system is limited. One operator with one launcher can cover only a narrow slice of the attack vectors that the enemy might use. The standard form is the lightweight multiple launcher, which holds 3 missiles ready to fire, so an operator can engage 3 targets one after another without reloading. Furthermore, this version can be mounted on a Land Rover or a similar vehicle with a small retrofit. But the version doing the most interesting work in Ukraine right now is the Stormer HVM. The Stormer is a British tracked armoured vehicle adapted specifically for very short-range air defence. It carries 8 Starstreak missiles ready to fire on its roof-mounted launcher, with a further 12 stowed inside the hull, and it runs a 3-person crew. Bolted to the launcher is something called the Air Defence Alerting Device, an infrared scanner and processor that detects incoming air threats, prioritizes them, and automatically slews the weapon sight onto the target. That last capability is more important than it sounds, because the hardest problem in very short-range air defense is usually not the interception at all. It's the detection. Low-altitude threats, and small drones especially, can be tiny, quiet, fast, and masked by terrain. A crew that doesn't know a target is there until it's already overhead has lost the engagement before it began. The alerting device exists to give that crew the few seconds it needs to find, track, and fire. The Stormer also gives the crew armor protection, mobility, and the ability to move between engagements. A lone operator standing in a field is a target moments after the first shot. A Stormer crew can fire and then displace what artillery crews would call shoot and scoot. When Ukraine first received these systems, the primary threat was conventional, low-flying Russian aircraft and attack helicopters. But Ukraine's skies in 2026 look almost nothing like that. But before going into that, make sure to subscribe to The Military Show. We track major events in the war and global geopolitics, so you can be sure to have an ear to the ground on major events. Moving out of the ground and into the sky is Russia's latest attempt to cover any sort of territory. Russia now floods the battle space with Shahed one-way attack drones, Lancet loitering munitions, Orlan reconnaissance drones, Zala strike drones, decoys built to look like the real thing, and cruise missiles, all arriving in mixed packages at different altitudes on different routes in different quantities. The goal is frequently not to hit one specific target. The goal is to overload Ukrainian air defense, force defensive positions to reveal themselves, make expensive interceptors get spent on cheap drones, and open gaps at other weapons that are more lethal. That's a completely different problem from a single Russian helicopter popping up over a tree line, and Ukrainian forces have adapted Starstreak and the Stormer to meet it. The 1129th Bila Tserkva Anti-Aircraft Missile Regiment, where Bila Tserkva means White Church, is one of the units that has made the transition. Originally built around a mix of Western and Soviet-era systems, the regiment has been documented operating its Stormer HVMs against Russian drones, with Ukrainian reporting crediting individual vehicles with dozens of kills apiece. More recently, crews have been pairing the Stormer with a new generation of interceptor drones, cheap, fast, purpose-built quadcopters, and fixed-wing chasers like the Ukrainian Sting, designed specifically to run down Shaheds. A Stormer commander has stated that the system has been used against Shaheds, against reconnaissance drones, against Lancet strike drones, and against at least one cruise missile. That's a remarkable expansion of the system's original mission. A weapon designed in the era of the attack helicopter has become part of the answer to a drone war that didn't exist when it was first fielded. There's an important nuance here though, and it comes in the form of a companion missile. Alongside Starstreak, Britain also supplies Ukraine with a lightweight, multi-role missile known in the UK's native service as the Mach. It weighs around 13 kilograms, has a range exceeding 6 kilometers, and a velocity above Mach 1.5, and it uses the same family of laser beam riding guidance as Starstreak. In September 2024, the UK confirmed a £162 million, or approximately $216 million replenishment order for the missile, with the first batch of hundreds heading to Ukraine, which tells you how heavily it was leaned on back then. The crucial difference between these two systems is the warhead. Where Starstreak relies on its dense tungsten darts, the Mach carries a roughly 3 kilogram triple-effect warhead, a shape charge combined with a blast fragmentation sleeve set off by a laser proximity fuse. In practical terms, Starstreak's dart is brutal against helicopters and aircraft, precisely because it penetrates before detonating. But against a small drone, a direct dart impact is not always the most reliable way to score a kill, because a small target is simply too small to hit in the first place. A warhead that explodes near the target and sprays fragments, triggered by proximity rather than a direct strike, is far more forgiving against these. So effectively, the two missiles cover each other's weaknesses. One is built to gut something big and armored, the other to swat something small and elusive. Because we try to be honest around here, we also have to be clear about what Starstreak can't do, which matters in the 2026 landscape of the war. Somewhat unfortunately, the biggest downside of the Starstreak is baked into its greatest strength, and that is its lack of fire and forget functionality. The operator has to keep tracking the target continuously after launch, since the missile is following a beam that the operator is holding onto the target. If the operator loses the target in the sight picture, the guidance degrades. Additionally, in a sky full of small, fast, low-signature drones weaving on unpredictable paths, maintaining that continuous optical track under pressure is genuinely difficult. Suddenly, inclement weather and visibility matters, and smoke and dust can distort the laser beams that the missile uses to navigate. Starstreak is also not a cheap interceptor, with a 3-part warhead costing between $100,000 and $130,000. Against drones, which often cost in the range of $10,000 to $20,000, or even up to $50,000 for the more complex models, the cost arithmetic gets uncomfortable very quickly. That's precisely why pairing it with cheaper interceptor drones and Martlets matters so much. When the threat is small and cheap, you don't want to spend an expensive missile on it. And there is one more piece of information that we're still missing. We don't really have comprehensive, independently verified data on Starstreak's kill rate against drone targets specifically. Ukrainian crews are clearly using it, and early reports have been promising. For example, back in April 2022, intelligence reports suggested at least 7 Orlan 10s were successfully downed by Starstreaks in Vovchansk. So there is precedence to suggest that the Starstreak is actually effective as a drone hunter. However, it's also unlikely to be a complete answer to Russia's drone strategy. Then again, nothing is a complete answer to Russia's drone strategy on its own. That's the entire logic of a layered defense. Which brings us to the bigger question. Why is a weapon that made headlines in the spring of 2022 and then largely disappeared from the news suddenly relevant again 4 years later? The answer has almost nothing to do with the missile and almost everything to do with the war around it. On the ground, Russia's war has stalled. In May 2026, Russian forces captured just 14 square kilometers of territory, the smallest monthly gain since October 2023, and that was despite launching over 35% more assaults than the month before. More attacks, less ground. The Institute for the Study of War also assessed the Ukrainian forces have largely halted Russia's spring-summer 2026 offensive, with Russia gaining a presence in only a fraction of the territory it took in May 2025. Ukraine has even clawed some ground back, as the past few months have been the few to have net gains for Ukraine. And if the Russians can't find a way to pick up momentum, the goal of capturing the Donbass this year is slipping out of their reach fast. Now, behind the front, the machine that feeds the war is grinding down too. Furthermore, the Russian war effort has been wrestling with shrinking industrial capacity under Western sanctions and dwindling stocks of nearly every category of weapon, slowly shifting the Kremlin's own cost-benefit calculation. Meanwhile, Ukrainian long-range drones have become more commonplace, striking the oil refineries that fund the war. Putin is losing money, men, and momentum. So when the army can't advance and the factories can't keep up and the oil revenue is burning, what's left? Pressure from the air. The Institute for the Study of War has directly linked Russia's escalating strikes on Ukrainian cities to its failure on the battlefield, framing the air campaign as both a substitute for ground progress and a way to distract from Ukraine's own deep strikes into Russia. That's why the nights over Kherson, Kramatorsk, Dnipro, and Kyiv have become a grind of drones and missiles aimed at apartment blocks, food storage, and power. Unable to break Ukraine's army, Russia is trying to break Ukraine's cities. And that pivot from a ground war to an air war of cheap, mass-produced drones is exactly the environment in which a system like Starstreak becomes relevant all over again. So let's step back and look at what Russia is actually betting on. Its air campaign rests on a theory that enough cheap drones, in enough mixed packages, in enough volume, will eventually overwhelm any defense. Quantity is a quality of its own after all. But that theory runs into trouble when the defender has a missile that doesn't care about countermeasures, a vehicle that can detect and engage a threat before the crew even has time to get nervous, and 4 years of hard-won operational experience that no manual fully captures. Russia tried to flood the sky. Britain gave Ukraine something built to sort through it. The darts are still tungsten, the guidance still laughs at flares, and the crews running these systems have gotten very, very good at finding the things Russia would prefer they didn't find. Starstreak was never designed for the war it's now fighting, and that may be the most interesting thing about it. A weapon built to kill helicopters has found a second life killing drones, not because it does everything, but because it does one thing that almost nothing else does, and it does it with near-perfect precision. Paired with the right layered defense around it, this strange little British missile has turned out to be one of the quietest and most stubborn problems Putin's air war has run into. And so far, Russia still doesn't have a clean answer to it. But Russia's problems in the air go much deeper than one single system. To learn more, check out this video, and make sure to subscribe to The Military Show for more news.